Good evening, Detroit Lakes. This is the Vikings Territory Breakdown. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of VikingsTerritory.com, PurplePTSD.com, MiniIce.com, and finally we can announce our newest site, FranchiseTagged.com. It's a general NFL site run by Dustin Baker, who is one of the senior Vikings insiders on our Vikings network, and he's put together a really cool team of social media NFL heads that so far have been cranking out a lot of really great content, a lot of free agency content. So definitely keep an eye out for FranchiseTag.com. Follow them on Facebook and or Twitter. But I am here, as always. I live by the airport, so I don't know if you could pick up that sound that just went by, but that was very Dunkirk-esque. I'm trying to build anticipation. Mr. Joe Oberly is here.
Hey, Joe. Yeah, you should have had a website called AaronGoBrow.com for today.
AaronGoBrow.com. Yeah, it's someone snapped that up. Unfortunately.
Probably. Happy St. Patty's to you.
You guys wearing green?
Heck no.
Yes, sir.
There's a penalty there. My Irish ancestors are rolling over in their potato famine pauper graves. What a dark start to the show. How's your week going, Oberly? You keeping up on all this crazy free agency news and rumors and zaniness that's going on out there?
I am. I've been kind of watching it. I'm pleased so far, but I'd like to see more. You know, I think the Vikings are doing some things to at least get in the game, clearing a little space and making some moves. So far so good, but they got a lot to do. So I'm waiting for the total package before I can really say it was a win or not.
Yeah, I'm seeing conflicting numbers as to what their salary cap space is. From what I looked at right before the show, it looks like they have 16, 17 million left, but I've seen numbers as high as 30. I think that was maybe before the Tomlinson signing. That math makes sense. But for listeners of the show, they'll know the last couple of weeks we've been, mainly me, bemoaning the lack of money that the Vikings had at that point and saying this is perhaps the best offseason to have a lot of salary cap money ever, just because of the COVID cap and teams cutting, the Kansas City Chiefs cutting their offensive tackles. We talked last week about guys that were, Pro Bowl guys getting traded, offensive linemen for 7th round picks. There's just a lot out there, and a lot of the stuff that the Vikings have been tied to Shaq Griffin or Kevin Zeitler, that they obviously didn't end up getting those players. But I wanted, as we are again also joined with the third corner of this triangle of influence by the most Irish of the three of us, Mr. Tim McNiff. I wanted to check in first and to see how your week's going, dude, even though you and I talk every 5-10 minutes, or I drive by your house when you're sleeping.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I am very Irish, and happy St. Patty's Day to everyone out there. Happy to celebrate. And I feel kind of bad for Rick Spielman and Bob Brzezinski, because I think they must have been, on vacation somewhere, or maybe they were involved in like a world-class Jenga tournament or something. And somebody said, hey, free agency started. And they're like, oh crap, we better see if we can renegotiate some contracts.
Yeah.
I mean, what the bleep?
Yeah.
We're not talking to Adam Thielen about his contract and everything else until we're actually in the tampering period.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, the Vikings, it's just like this whole thing just kind of snuck up on Rick.
Well, is that what we're getting, though, as far as we're learning that now, and they may have started talks earlier? You'd think he must have been broaching this sooner. I see what you're saying, Tim.
Yeah, maybe some of these guys like Anthony Barr were saying no way, and now they're saying maybe. There is actually a tweet that I put in the agenda specifically about that, because the wording of it confused me, and I want to read it to you guys aloud. It's from Doogie, I believe, in regards to the Thielen restructure. He says, does sound like the reworking of wide receiver Adam Thielen's contract is more likely than not to get done, period. He says he is not giving back money. So does that mean
they're talking?
They are talking about a restructure, but
that's
Thielen,
I would say.
Yeah, but if he's not giving back any money, does that mean
there are so many things you can do? You can
with signing bonuses or something?
Yes.
Or guaranteed money over longer periods of time?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think they ever give money back. No rightful agent would allow that to happen because it cuts into his commission, his or her commission. But they'll extend him, or they'll front load it with signing bonuses and such, and just give him the same money, but give him in a different form that frees up cap space. Right, Tim?
Yes, and as I've just learned this cycle, they don't have to really even ask. Teams have the right to do this. It's written in. This is one of these strengths that the owners have, but it's sort of like bad business. So you it's a courtesy to say, would you? And then you start to work on it with them before you're just saying, hey, good morning. Guess what we just did to you?
What are the parameters for that then? It would have to be same length of time, just a different allocation structure of the money that was agreed upon, so they could just open their mailbox and maybe see like, oh wow, I suddenly got 75% of my next 2 years in one check under signing bonus. Is that kind of what you're going for? I mean, they obviously can't
That's where I'm headed, because I'm saying I didn't know this until this period, and I was watching somebody else's Twitter exchange, and somebody said, the owners don't have to do this. It's a courtesy, and somebody put underneath correct. It's written into their agreement, the agreement they have with the players' union. So I think it really comes down to what form does it take? How are they going to do it? What does the bonus look like? And I mean, the king of restructure is Tom Brady, and he's done it again. And the Vikings have modeled sort of Kirk Cousins after this to some extent, and it's. I think this time if the Vikings were to go back to Cousins again, it would have involved an extension. And I don't think the Vikings are comfortable going down that road. So with Brady, of course, if you're Tampa, that's why he's now has a contract that takes him to where he's 45, is what he's always said. He wants to play till he's 45. He has that contract now. The Bucs have more money to work with. Gronk is coming back. They've got a couple linebackers. But the fact that they weren't having these discussions with Thielen beforehand and with some of the other people that they've gone to, Rashad Hill, is sort of like, why weren't you having this before? And they just seemed like they were caught flat-footed. I was going to say with their pants down. So we use whatever one you want in this thing. But they did have targets. When this whole process started, they had definite targets. And they didn't get them. And they were outbid, and maybe in the long term, that's a good thing. I just don't know now with Tomlinson. Was this always their focus? Because nobody was talking about it, but when you heard it, it makes perfect sense. So was that always their focus? And you see just where the market was set and how much money they had? I don't know.
It's a good point, because you hear today that, or at least I saw on Twitter today, that the Vikings claimed Tomlinson was their number one target. And maybe he was. I who knows? They're going to say all this stuff, and that's where I don't get too excited too early with this. I mean, last week we were talking about Anthony Barr saying nope, not going to do it. Doing his best George W.H. Bush impersonation. I'm not going to do it. So, and now this week he's going to restructure it. So I always want to take it with a grain of salt what you hear coming out, because you're going to get conflicting reports. You're going to have some of the stuff put out there just gin up controversy and maybe help it work in their direction. I mean, look what Stephon Diggs last year did. He started tweeting and eventually tweeted himself right out of Minnesota, which is what he wanted. So, so much comes out, so much gets changed, so much still happens. But Tim's right. They should have been, if they weren't working on this, for a long time. They say a free tampering period. Well, these people are talking, and you don't want to tick off, your best players, and surely don't want to tick off Adam Thielen, especially for our listeners in Detroit Lakes, for crying out loud on KDLM.
Yeah, I mean, you would have thought the first order of business after the offseason, or after the season ended, after filling some of the coaching vacancies, would have been, how do we get under the cap? We know that COVID cap's coming up. There's going to be a lot of available players. How can we clear as much cap space as possible? Get under the cap first, then do that. So you would think that they would have had a flow chart saying, well, if this doesn't happen, we need to do this. I think the other side of the Cousins thing, to kind of go back to that for a second, is the fact that I watched the NFL Films sort of documentary about his decision period, the free agency decision period, and they were in his house with him every day. And one of the major points that I picked up on is that he's a very shrewd businessman, and that he wanted a 3-year deal specifically because he knew that once he got that big deal, it would set the market for quarterbacks. All the other top 10 to 12 quarterbacks would then go to their teams and say, well, this guy who hasn't won anything is getting this much money. I should be getting, X amount more. And then that led Cousins to be able to last offseason restructure and get, $45 million guaranteed next season. And I think that I don't necessarily think that it's just a one-sided thing where the Vikings are like, we don't really want to extend Cousins because we don't know if we want him to be our quarterback after next season or whatever. I think they kind of maxed out any sort of realistic incentive they could give him, because when he lowered his cap hit to $21 million last year, that upped the guaranteed money this year and next season, and they can't really do that again. They could say, well, we can extend you and give you $45 million again the season after that, but I think Cousins believes that partially, well, if I play well enough, and once the salary cap gets back up to normal, maybe I can make more money year to year. I don't know. He just seems very shrewd in that regard. So I think maybe there's a little bit more back and forth there than some people think. But
I have a question for Tim, though. Tim, I'm starting to think about your point you're making, why this hasn't been happening sooner. It is a good point. If they can do, as you said, just move the money over to bonuses and, not even contact the player until later or until the check arrives. Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they structuring all contracts that way? Why didn't they clear the decks months ago with all of this or just hit the ground running? And, while every Vikings fan is out here wringing their hands and every media personnel is telling the story of the fact that the Vikings don't have any cap space and we're screwed for this year. Why isn't this happening that way? What's the advantage of structuring it a certain way and then just going right back in the next year and changing it back because we have cap problems and blah, blah, blah? I don't understand the ideas behind it. So
can I add an addendum to that question? Wouldn't that at some point lead a super wealthy team or a super wealthy owner to say, I'm just going to sign all these amazing free agents and I'm just going to pay them all primarily via signing bonus and keep their cap numbers at the veteran minimum and then just give them like $30 million each? I'm sure there's some sort of rule against that or cap against that, but it just got my mind to thinking like you could see someone like Jerry Jones who had, bought the Cowboys for $75 million and has all this equity, could theoretically, through that logic, do something like that.
There you go, Tim. Chomp on all that.
Yeah, right. I'm just saying something a great article for Vikings Territory or for Franchise Tagged. So why isn't everyone doing this? I don't know, because everyone seems like they are doing it now. And you refer back to the Cousins situation. That really did set this model for how this was going to be done going forward. Everybody has gone to school on that one, monetarily and just from a structure standpoint. It really did change the game in how quarterbacks were compensated and valued in this league. But I think they were in a situation with Cousins where another restructure would have put more years onto the contract. And with Barr, it was the opposite. He agreed to it, but they had to void the final 2 years of the contract. And the gamble is there. If he has a productive season, there will be more money next year. And so the cap will go back up and teams will have more money to spend and you have the opportunity to make more money. So I think when you're 31 years old and you're Anthony Barr and you're coming off a torn pectoral muscle and you're 31, I think that's a gamble. I mean, if you've seen what's happened with even interior linemen, some that have played for us and played at a high level, and then they hit the free agency thing and it just didn't happen for them. When you're 30 plus in this game, you better still have a really solid track record or you're not going to get that money.
It makes sense though for Barr because
they would have cut him.
Well, yeah, maybe, but I'm just saying it makes more sense for Barr because take the chance next year when you can really get the payday when the cap is back to a normal area and you go out and start trolling around and you're going to find something. He's banking, like you said, is on having a really good season and recover from this injury. But I can see first one I thought, what's he doing? But now it makes total sense to me. I mean, you got to, rather than try to get squeezed in to this year, why not get the opportunity when the bonanza is really going to be big out there next year when people are going to be looking for free agents.
And we have to also look at why he was initially resistant to it, like what changed his mind. I do think that they were basically saying, like, take the restructure or we'll cut you and eat the dead money, and we're not going to pay you $13 million a year, coming off this injury especially.
Yeah, I think he had seen what had happened to the kicker, and then the punter took the restructured deal, and I think you're exactly right. He and his agent had to have sat there and read the tea leaves and said, is anyone else going to pay us $14.9 this year? No. $15 million for Anthony Barr? Probably not. I mean, a third of that maybe. So I think that he did a smart thing by getting the guaranteed money, getting it now, and gambling on the fact that he's got to produce and come back and play next year. And now you got the guys who aren't getting the money, but who are still out there. I mean, we have several players that the Vikings aren't going to make qualifying offers to, who are going to hit free agency. How will they feel about that? Will they be willing to come back, and at what rate will they be willing to come back? And my guess is that everyone's going to start bargain shopping pretty quick.
Well, I saw some initially, and I think it's been clarified since, but some of our writers internally were really kind of confused as to why a team like the Vikings, who doesn't have a ton of cap space to play with, more than maybe some of us, I'll say me, thought we would. But it's not like they have the pick of the litter for every single position of need, would go out and get a guy like Tomlinson, who a lot of people thought it was kind of redundant with Michael Pierce coming back next year. I'm bullish on this move because I feel like if there was any deficiency that stood out the most on this defense in 2020, it was the lack of a traditional or even real nose tackle in the middle. Teams just running the ball. You had Jaleel Johnson, who's a 3-tech, playing nose tackle. He's not big enough. And now that the Vikings essentially have two pretty big guys clogging up that middle now with Tomlinson moving to the 3-tech position. And I think it's just assuming some of these other things are true with Anthony Harris maybe coming back, a healthy Barr, a healthy Kendricks. We can talk about Daniel Hunter in a minute. But, looking back at the 2020 season, if they had Michael Pierce in some of those situations and then some semblance of an edge rush on both or one side, things could have turned out a lot differently, especially with how well the offense was performing at times. What is your guys' initial take on the Tomlinson move? Do you think it was money well spent, or that money could have been maybe better used elsewhere?
Joe?
I was initially pleased with it because I know that the defensive line is in such a deficiency after this last season. You got to get Danielle Hunter back to make it to make all these moves good. I'm glad to see that Michael Pierce is happy about the move, and it does go a long way to helping stop the run for this team. Although you better then start getting your quarterbacks and your secondary situated, because the people are going to throw the ball on you if it's going to be tougher to run. So I don't know much about Tomlinson and how well he's done. I've looked at his stats, but I haven't really paid that much attention to him. But so far, so good, I guess I would say, as far as being a good move.
Yeah, his stats, I mean, his snaps are almost 50-50 on runs and passes. So he's a guy who can, cause some penetration, can push the pocket. And if you can dictate which way the quarterback's going to go or the offense is going to go, that's really important. And I also think that I just am tired of the Vikings being undersized on defense. I mean, it's great if you have mobile guys, but we talked about this. We need big guys who can put their hand on the ground and move people. And I think both those guys qualify. And they sound as if you alluded to Joe Overly, that excited about the opportunity to play together. And I also would think that this would bode well for not only your linebackers, but for your defensive ends, because you are forcing if you're gonna run a play where you're going to say, okay, we're pushing Rodgers this way, and if it's Danielle Hunter's way, then I'm pretty excited about that. If I'm Danielle Hunter, so I know we're all trying to read the tea leaves to Hunter, and they've got to do something for Danielle Hunter. I mean, it's almost embarrassing the contract that he signed versus what other defensive ends are getting now. It's you can't almost. It's ridiculous to say this maybe, but I almost feel like, we almost can't expect him to only take $11 million or whatever his salary is when you got a Joey Bosa at 27, million. And, I just, and Hunter's never done anything but perform. When he has been on the field, he's been the consummate professional. And so I think the whole thing's setting up to where everyone's going to be mad. But I think it's going to be some sort of an edge rusher or something with that 14th pick or with the 23rd pick, whatever they trade back to. And then they'll try to come back and get an offensive lineman.
I see a big bonus in Danielle Hunter's future, personally.
They're going to have to do something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I don't think he ever leaves without it. I don't think he goes to war without him, because he knows the viability of his secondary is reliant upon the pass rush, and if you've got one of the best in the game on your under contract, you're going to try to keep him somehow. So go ahead, Joe.
I just and I've said this before, so I don't want to be repetitive, but I feel like every variable in the Danielle Hunter thing is just bad. It's the type of money he would garner is something that I find a little strange. I honestly thought seeing some of these restructures and people like Bradley Reef getting released, I thought they were gearing up to be able to pay Hunter, and now they're reducing that amount because they're signing other people. I just don't know, outside of that bonus thing that we talked about, how they're going to be able to afford him. That's part of it. The other part of it is, do you want to lock down a $26-27 million a year edge rusher who is coming off of the injury that he had? You don't know if he's going to be able to perform. But that in Hunter's mind, is the number one thing to him, saying, my next snap could be my last. I need to make as much money as I can while I'm playing. So it doesn't make him feel any one way or the other about it. I mean, it doesn't make him say, well, I get it. I'm injured, so on and so forth. He also knows that somebody will pay him that money. And so I just feel like, this week there was, news of, the Vikings signing Tomlinson, and there's a report that there's an offer out there to bring Mackenzie Alexander back, which I most definitely think is going to happen. And I think that's where we got the news from Hunter's camp. Essentially, he went on Instagram, he took all the Viking stuff down to create news, to create leverage, and his agent came out and said, everything's on the table, including, sitting out or forcing a trade. And I think that stems from that frustration of saying, well, why are we're getting further away from the goal if you're just going to be signing these other guys. And so I mean, people that listen to the show before, or even the intro to this show, know that I tend towards, I've told you this before, Oberly, whenever there's something that happens with the Vikings, any sort of new stimuli, I always think of what's the worst possible outcome, and then I basically say that's probably what's going to happen. I just can't see a happy end to this in Minnesota, and that is awful, because he is, broke all those records, is the youngest guy, to get this many sacks by the age of 25. He's arguably the best edge rusher in the entire NFL. He is transformative on the field, and it just feels like we're all ignoring the fact that the Vikings aren't even trying to get the type of money they need to re-sign him, unless I'm missing something. Tim, what do you think? Grab any one of those.
I'm intrigued about how this is all going to play out also. And you said this to me before, and I agree with you. It doesn't look good but there has to be some sort of a path forward. And I just believe that this is where, if you're the Vikings, you're obviously taking the advice of whatever the medical personnel are. And they've got to be able to tell you that, you know what, there's no reason that he can't line up and play this year. And again, at his age, he's just really heading into his prime. I mean, he may have lost a bit of a step, maybe off of his first, year or two in the league, but he's such a physical wonder that, and he's just heading into what Denny Green would call his man strength. So I really believe that if you sign him to a 3-year contract, you're going to get 3 really good years out of him, barring injury. But that's anybody in this game. I mean, one play could be over for anybody. And he knows that now too, and that's why if he is going for the money, it's because maybe it's not because he can't play anymore, but he does know that it could just be over just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough negotiations. I'll say what I said just a little bit ago. I don't think Zimmer goes to war without him, but I find some of this stuff kind of silly when you see this taking down of photos and putting up of photos. He must have went to talk to Stephon Diggs and say, "This is how am I supposed to do this? How do I get these guys?" And they put social media to work. I think he's got to be their number one guy that they have to keep on this roster, and they have to figure it out somehow. And they do so many different things with restructuring, bonuses, extensions, blah blah blah. As we said, they're going to find a way to get him in the door and keep him there. Yep. So I think it will happen.
I do too.
I certainly hope
they actually were pursuing other defensive ends, in this whole thing. So I don't think it was to replace him. I think it was to put together an imposing front four. And I don't think that it's, Stephen Weatherly. I think Weatherly's a guy you put in different situations and cause a mismatch problem with his speed and athletic ability. But I don't think he's an every down defensive end. I don't think he's built for that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, my thing has always been, and Joe knows this, the more that they can kind of solve these defensive question mark issues via free agency or retaining players that are already on the roster, the less the chance that Zimmer will ignore the offensive line in the early rounds of the draft. The last thing I want is to have any excuse to draft another corner in the first or second round. I really like the idea of Mackenzie Alexander coming back, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of his. I do understand, though, I reached out to him for a story about his time here, and he kind of LOL'd at me on Twitter, and then I was like, oh yeah, I get it. You have no idea who I am, but I was just like, I've worked with a couple guys, on or off the record or whatever, and his response was, he's like, I just don't want to waste your time. I'm not in a position where I can really speak openly right now. And then, a couple days later, we hear the news that he might be rejoining the Vikings, which I thought was telling. That's as close to.
So this is recent that you reached out to him.
Yeah, we just talked he messaged me back like a week ago, and because I was like, you have no reason to trust me. I spoke to a guy that has a Facebook page or a Twitter that and he was like, no. I've heard you guys before. I've read your stuff. Like, I just don't want to waste your time because I'm not really in the position where I can speak openly right now. And then I kind of thought about that, what he meant, and then I saw the news about the offer on the table, and I said, well, that makes sense.
Which brings up another point for me, if I can jump in here real quick.
Of course, my friend.
What I was talking about earlier, and what we hear and what really happens. How much should we put on the fact that he was disgruntled, and that's why he left, because he got played in the 17th meaningless game last year? How much is that just talk, and how much of that is real? Because here he is, if the money's ready, all's forgiven, coming back to Minnesota.
Yeah, I think I wrote an article about it today, and I don't know if you guys were big fans of The Simpsons in the 90s, but one of the best episodes ever is when Homer finally, when he has two kids. Yeah, he has just Bart and Lisa. Maggie isn't born yet, and he gets to quit the power plant to go work at the bowling alley, and then he finds out that Marge is pregnant, and he has to basically go back, and they ask him, "Are you an applicant or a supplicant?" And he has to crawl through this little dusty hole so that when he comes out, Mr. Burns is there and can say, "You came crawling back, eh?" It kind of felt to me, Cassie Alexander, I think, took a risk in taking a one-year deal over a longer-term deal that the Vikings had offered him, kind of a prove-it deal in Cincy. And I don't watch the Bengals very much, but I know that he did not have a good year. It was the worst year I think he's had as a pro, at least in terms of PFF grades. And so I think he did what most people would do, which is saying, "Man, I should have taken that deal with the Vikings." Yes, I don't think they treated me right, but it's either that or getting another one-year deal somewhere else, whereas maybe the Vikings will give me something a little more consistent. That was my interpretation anyway.
Well, he had a contentious time here. I mean, early on, he was resistant to fall in the fold for Zimmer. Zimmer has his cornerbacks play a certain way, his defense play a certain way, and McKenzie was trying to always freelance a little bit too much, and Zimmer would come out and say that. So there, I figured, okay, then maybe he did rub him a little bit wrong, but maybe he found out that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and wants to come back where he thinks they really know how to play. Because by the time he left here, he had finally got it. He had finally given over to, wanting to play Zimmer's defense. So I always found it really interesting that he did leave, because, once you finally give in and say, okay, I got to be a team player rather than a me player. And so I find all this really interesting. I'd love to see him back. I think he was just coming into his own. So, and maybe this is the place to be, but boy, it's all just, strange machinations going on behind the scenes here.
And it would also reduce the need to maybe draft, because, obviously Mike Hughes is most likely down after this year. Having Mac, even though he's 26, 27, would get kind of a elder statesman role, like the Terrence Newman role, even though he's 10 years younger than Terrence Newman was when he was in that role here. Someone who's been in the system, who gets it, who can, also play the nickel, maybe play on the outside like he did in college, teach these guys up a little bit out on the field. There's a lot of benefits to it, I think. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I just was really intrigued why you thought that this was such a, and you've explained it, but I was wondering why you thought that this was so likely he was going to come back, because his last year with the Vikings, he didn't do an interview like the last 2 months, maybe more of the season. I mean, he refused everything. So it was obvious he wasn't going to say anything bad, because he had nothing nice to say. He really was not happy, Joe. He went and he played that nickel spot, but he didn't want to. Yeah. And it really ended up raising his value, got him the contract that he wanted, but he left. I mean, he just, the door didn't hit him on the way out. So how do you resolve that, on the way back? He's got to come in with an understanding and with having come to terms with the fact that he's going to play that spot. And the Vikings are counting on the fact that he's going to play that spot. So I don't know if it's as done a deal as it maybe as people think it is. But I guess I would not be as surprised as I would have been a month ago, because I didn't think there was any way he'd be coming back, or that they wouldn't necessarily want him back, because when he left here, he wasn't a happy camper.
Yeah, I think failure can teach people a lot of things and humble people, and I think that the Vikings lucked out in that they probably would have offered him more money last offseason, or more guaranteed money, or longer terms, and now he kind of basically has lost whatever little leverage that he had last offseason by doing this, and they can basically say, well, if you don't sign with us, who's going to take you? Do you want to really do another year-to-year thing, or do you want to come through and get 2 to 3 years or whatever, and it'll cost them less than maybe someone else that they could get of equal value, and he understands the system, so you don't have to worry about the acclimation process, and he's played okay. I mean, he's never been really anything to write home about. He's had some good stretches, but he's also had some kind of head-scratching moments.
He had some splash plays too, yeah.
So it's at least something, I guess.
Joe, can I ask you a question? Something you touched on earlier that I didn't realize was happening. You said it's now starting to look more likely that Anthony Harris might come back. I hadn't heard that. Is that
okay,
right?
So that is per let me double check where I got that from. I'm pretty sure it was Doogie.
Oh, okay. Well,
I
that
was
Darren Doogie Wolfson.
I was really actually surprised by that as well.
yeah, I
Um,
thought it was foregone conclusion that he's gone. To be
yeah,
honest, so I was
it says
surprised to hear.
he tweeted Vikings making a push to keep free agent safety Anthony Harris. I hear, and then he does a second tweet. I don't know the verbiage for that because I'm not a big Twitter guy. Keanu O'Neal is another safety that has come up with the Vikings. Seems one way or another they'll add some safety via free agency, which still has a long way to go. Yeah, I mean that
Well, that's
also.
interesting. Yeah, that's a contentious relationship potentially because of the fact that they franchised him last year, and who knows how from one player to the next how they take that. So,
I mean, not to keep belaboring this point, but would anybody in media or on the show or fans be happier if they kept Anthony Harris and then Daniil Hunter walked? I mean, I don't understand that you can't have both. There's absolutely no way you can keep both. So maybe it's a contingency plan, but we don't have the type of money to be keeping a Anthony Harris around at what $10 to $12 million a year. And
we established earlier you can do whatever they want, Joe.
I suppose.
and I read this somewhere else, and this may have been from Doogie also, that right away in free agency, either Cincinnati or Cleveland retained a safety. And at the rate they retained him, they're like, well, if he only got that means Harris could probably fit in the Vikings slot. So the market may be set, not as high as maybe the Vikings believed it was going to be. And you've got the two sides now looking at each other like, Harris didn't have a great year this past year, and he's I don't know if I say regressed, or maybe teams sort of figured him out, but he just wasn't. The year before, he was kind of a revelation. He was always in the right place at the right time, and this past year, it seemed like he wasn't. And,
I feel like part of that, though, was the fact that they just had them playing like cover two all the time to compensate for the young corners. Like, he wasn't necessarily able to like freelance and ball hawk it much because he was trying to basically keep the rookie corner in front of him alive, for lack of a better word. I have to think that as part of it, but then on the other hand side of it, Harrison's had probably more interceptions last season than he's had his entire career, so it's just there's probably no logic to what I just said. I know that they clearly had to do a lot of help with those corners, and that kind of changed their typical way of running that defense.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. The results weren't there either, and you can see there obviously. Spielman made this comment last week. I look at Devin Daniil Hunter back and Pearson, as free agents. We've already got free agents. We've got joining our team, and they add in Tomlinson, so they've made themselves better up front. Barr comes back. It doesn't look like Wilson will. Is that better or not? I think we could probably argue about that one until the end of the show and then some. If we're static at safety and we're static at corner and maybe adding Mackenzie Alexander, maybe we have improved ourselves. This is a team that, just collapsed on so many levels last year. The depth wasn't there even for special teams. So this to me would be like, if you would have gone into this, in a better position salary cap wise, maybe you're adding athletes like this other linebacker they added to be sort of a depth guy, but he's got to be a special teams guy because they just haven't had that part of that third of the equation. And I loved it when I saw that, there was some talk for a moment there about perhaps Daniel Carlson coming back. And I thought I could see Daniel Carlson, if they haven't even mentioned to him. Is Mike Zimmer still there? Yeah, right.
Yeah, I
don't think so.
You brought up depth. I just want to ask a quick question. Why did they let Shamar Stephen go then, or Steven, or let him go? Because wouldn't he, with the other guy moving in, wouldn't he be a good depth person? Or is that,
at what price?
Yeah, I mean, couldn't you maybe?
No, but Joe, but that's what it all comes down to is under the money that we're still trying to figure out. How do we keep Harris and how do we keep Daniil Hunter
yeah.
and the contract money they would have owed him and would have owed Odenebo, they don't fit. But if they now get into free agency and they don't get a great offer from somewhere else, would they want to have them back? Probably. Will these guys want to come back for less money? And you guys said earlier, no agent would be good with that. Well, happened to Riley Reef last year. I mean, they let him go late, and then he wasn't really going to go anywhere else, and he took less to stay. Would these other guys take less to stay, depending on the system and the opportunity to perhaps put up numbers and maybe go someplace else next year when there is more money? I mean, you don't want to be out of the league either. I just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with BB. We don't know what's going to happen with Stefan or Odenigbo. These are guys that we've invested time and money in, but right now, the money they're due, they don't fit.
And nobody's grabbed up Reef yet either. You think with a starting left tackle in the league coming off a really good year, there may be some steam on him, but I haven't heard a peep. Has anybody else?
No. I've heard that a couple NFC teams are looking at him. The headline was NFC rivals of the Vikings, so let me double check. But I will say, just as a side note, and this wasn't on the agenda, I'm a little surprised that Cousins hasn't offered to take a pay cut in some way. Tim, last week or the week before, you said something about Cousins that you really believe that he wants to win a Super Bowl in Minnesota. He wants to win here. I think that while I think it's an oversimplification to blame his contract for the financial issues that this team has had these last couple of years, because again, his cap hit last season was $21 million, and they still had to cut bait with tons of guys, Val Joseph and so on and so forth. Everson Griffin. I think if he really is looking at the lay of the land right now and seeing, okay, well maybe they can only keep Harris or Daniil Hunter, and what does that mean for our chances to win? Where was this team last season? What would the defense look like with Barr, Kendricks, Daniil Hunter, those two big guys now in the middle of that line, both those awesome safeties, maybe bring back Mackenzie Alexander. Those corners showed some semblance of growth towards the end of last season. That's something worth getting excited about. But losing Daniil Hunter is such a huge thing that you would think that he might say, okay, well, I've already made a ton of money. And he took less money to come here than going to New York, for example, that he would just say, like, can we reduce my cap this season by $5 million or just something? I'm just a little surprised that hasn't happened. Not to say that he's a bad guy for not doing it. I said earlier that he is, he's a businessman. But I would think that would be a very nice gesture, I guess is my point.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt from a public relations standpoint. That's good for point. Sure. And again, you're asking, you're going to put it out there. And I'm Googling it. Why hasn't he restructured his contract? And I don't know if it means that they've got to add more time. And I don't know what the poison pill is in that, because you would think that from both standpoints, the Vikings and Cousins, if this was an easy fix, they would have done it.
Yeah, isn't it the fact that he's got so much guaranteed money coming as soon as the date passes here that the only option you have is to add more time, and the Vikings are reluctant to do that. I think you said that earlier, Tim. That would make sense to me. That there's no movement there. They're probably looking at maybe drafting a younger quarterback and to start going into putting together the future of that position for the team. I don't know. And so you don't want to extend Cousins too far down the road if he's, going to be that much of a liability. He's not even going to play for you. So.
Well, another part of it too is that, if you were to cut Cousins right now, it would be $45 million in dead cap space.
Dead money. Yeah.
But next season it's only $10 million. And so any restructure, would obviously change that dynamic, and I obviously don't think they're going to cut him because they don't really have anybody behind him, unless for some reason somebody really special falls to them at 14, and then there's like you got to take that guy, like Justin Fields or something, or the North Dakota Trey Lance, the guy everyone seems super enamored with. It's interesting to see. I mean, again, it's really hard as somebody who, all of us obviously love this team, but as someone who hasn't seen the Vikings play in the Super Bowl, I always love this time of year because of all the possibilities. The pretendies, I love the pretendies, and it feels like we're a little hamstrung in that regard. But yeah, it's all about Daniel Hunter the rest of the way, or at least you would think it would be, and anything that isn't about him, it also tells you something about how that's going. So, I guess we'll see where the chips land. I did want to also highlight your story that from earlier in the week, Tim, that I believe I posted on Vikings Territory. Let me double check. It might be on Purple PTSD, actually. Either way, I'll cross, so it'll be on both sites. But it's a really, really great story, and one of the things that is kind of a new focus for us, that was actually one of the most earliest missions of Purple PTSD when I started that site back in May of 2015. It was doing a lot more. We have a category called Vikings history, and rewatching old games on YouTube and chatting about them, and I feel like there's just a lot, this wealth of amazing, just stories and players, and the Vikings are a very Shakespearean club. It's romantic. We romanticize these seasons, and so I always love stuff that delves back into older eras, but also kind of provides a peek behind the curtain, because you've had experiences that nobody really gets to have. I maybe get to DM a player every once in a while, and that means the world to me. But your story is so great. So I wanted you to kind of explain it to the audience so they can check it out.
Well, since you've allowed me to do these McNiff musings, and I just kind of share my own thoughts on different topics, but one of them is something I think everyone can relate to. My painful life as a Vikings fan, and I write different stories about different chapters and things that have happened. And as it were, when I went to work for CARE in '94, they bought the rights to become the official Viking station, which meant that we broadcast 5, I think, preseason games, and then did the coaches show throughout the year. And I have a couple stories about just doing the coaches show too. But this was the analyst was a former Viking offensive lineman by the name of Dave Huffman, and Huffman had played at Notre Dame with Joe Montana, and was a very opinionated guy, very funny guy. But I mean, he was like 6'6", 330 pounds. I mean, Dave was a big man.
Wow.
And so I tell a story about starting out. The first time I ever went out with him, we're literally walking from dinner to the bar without breaking stride. He reaches into this like plant, this sort of display at this hotel, picks up a terrarium, turns it over without breaking stride, shakes it, dumps the plant, out, the living plant out into the dirt of a larger plant, walks with the dirty terrarium, puts it down in the bar, and orders a drink to be served in the terrarium. So I think we're getting tossed, right? This bartender does not look happy. But again, Huffman is 6'6", 330 pounds. He starts schmoozing this guy. Soon he's cleaning out the terrarium, and he mixes up. And I wish I could tell you it was a martini versus a Manhattan. I don't know what it was, but he made him a drink in that thing, and that was Huffman's glass for drinking the rest of the night. So it was an incredible experience to be sort of in his wing, under his wing or in the wash, whatever, as he went from place to place. I was just part of the entourage. And so later in the year, the Vikings are playing Tampa down in Tampa. And we go out to dinner and then out afterwards. And there's 2 guys who are there as guests, or, of a Viking staffer. That's all I'll say. And they're giving him grief all night, telling him, you suck. You're so overrated as a player. And now you're fat and you're old and blah, blah. And they're on him all night and saying that they could, beat him like in a pass rush situation.
Oh, God.
Yes. And this goes on
these
and
are
on and on.
Just to reiterate, these are regular men.
You know what? As I said, they were like my age and size. But at the time would have meant, early 30s and about, 5'9", 5'10", and less than 200 pounds. Oh. And they want to pass rush against this former Viking. And he keeps telling them not to do it. Well, the story goes on that they try. and you should read the story to see kind of the end result. But I mean, it was one of those things where you're standing in a street in Tampa at about 2:30 a.m. watching something. Go, am I really watching what I'm watching right now? Because you've been drinking all night, and everything, and it was just wow.
He was great on the air too, right? I remember him on K-Fan for a long time. Just great in that setting, with a microphone in front of him. Do I remember that correctly?
You do. He was very opinionated, very sharp on his feet, very witty, a funny guy. He got in trouble sometimes. He would color outside the lines, and sometimes his brain had to catch up with his mouth. And he ended up doing some apologizing, but it made for good radio because a little shock value there. But he was a really dynamic man, bigger than life, really, and is no longer with us, and that was a sad story.
Yeah.
But I've got that sort of all wrapped up in that piece, and I appreciate getting the opportunity to share some of these stories because I don't want Dave to be forgotten either. And I told Joe Johnson that one of the nicer things was one of the first people that didn't write anything, but I saw had read the piece and put a heart on it was John Randall. So
nice.
John would have known Dave near the end of Dave's career is when John was just getting started.
That's great. I'm gonna have to check it out.
That's the type of stuff that I think is really special. That's a really, really amazing story. And, I'm not talking down about some of the other content we're doing, because I think it's all valuable, But we cover all the same transaction news, everything. You got to cover everything, but I've always just had and I'm sure every team is kind of like this, but growing up in the house I did with my dad, really, only showing most emotions that he displayed during Vikings games and not understanding it really wholly until I was 12 and Randy Moss came to town. Those are the stories that kind of bind us all together, and it's the type of stuff that I think a lot of places kind of overlook sometimes. And there's just I love hearing those stories. I'm super glad that you're sharing those with us and on our network. One of these days, I'm going to have Joe out the eternal question, the biggest mystery in Vikings history, which I'm not going to say too much here, Joe, but is who threw the whiskey bottle at that ref during the Cowboys game. And
Armin Terzian?
That's the ref, yep.
Oberle may know the identity of who should have been the Vikings starting quarterback, apparently. My dad was at that game.
Yeah. I do know somebody that was pinned for it. He said he threw a bottle, and he says his didn't hit the referee. But my brother, who played a sport with him, was with the game with him and said it did hit him. So I don't know. It's all hearsay. But I'd rather not.
Great throw. I mean, where were they sitting? The way my dad always explained it was that what angered him the most about it was that it wasn't it was like the ref coming from midfield, running with his arm for the touchdown, and it was like, that's not, why is he the one exclaiming touchdown? He's like, he said, asking from like the 50-yard line down to the end zone with his hands up in the air, somebody clipped him in the head with a whiskey bottle, and he fell down with his arms still straight up in the air. It was just like the greatest moment of all time. But
it was the worst moment of all time. But,
do you want to know something that will make you guys both quit this show right now? I don't think Pearson pushed off.
There's another show for the future.
I can tell you about my experience with Tom Landry, where I said to him, you and I both know Pearson pushed off. I said the same thing to Roger Staubach at a different occasion.
And what did they say?
Landry laughed. It was great. It was the day he got inducted into the Waco time. Wow. And he said to me, you don't sound like you're from around here. And he opened the door. So I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm from Minnesota. And I think we both know that Drew Pearson pushed off, and he laughed. And he said that we sure had some great games, was how he said it.
Oh,
He
way
was
to
such
go,
a
Jeff.
class act. I mean, you found out so much about him from his, he was a World War II fighter pilot, and just had been just a great, guy all the way up through the ranks. We couldn't have been more of a class act in that day. And, that era of man is just gone. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
Yeah.
like we were
Just
talking about
gone.
with Dunkirk.
Yes.
Those
Yes.
regular people just saying, and I'm sure a lot of them were World War vets, so they got it. Not, but the line in that movie when the fighter pilot he picks up, he's like, "We gotta go home." He's like, "If we don't do this, there'll be no home to go back to." It's just the greatest generation. I know that they had their faults and everything, but they were a very principled generation of people individually, and it's definitely not around anymore. The sort of stoicism I'm used to from my Swedish, by the other half Irish, half Swedish, essentially. That's gone by the wayside. But yeah, I want people to definitely check out franchisetag.com. We're really proud of it. It's a labor of love, like all of these sites that Dustin and his managing editing partner, Wes Johnson, have put together a really great team of writers who are all handling each different division, and we're pumping out a lot of different articles, and we're going to be adding more staff and building it. But all those articles are really, really well done, and so I hope people start to check that out and remember to follow it on Twitter and on Facebook as that develops. We're going to be in the next week launching an NFL draft prospect database called thedraftteam.com. That should be done by this time next week. That is run by our managing editor of Vikings Territory, Kirby O'Connor. They already have like 150 draft profiles set up. People probably have seen Kirby and Josh's draft prospect breakdowns on either Vikings Territory or Purple PTSD. They're really, really well done, and so we have that. We have a bunch of other cool sites. We have our first app coming out that's going to really kind of pull all this together and be very social media focused, to have a lot of features for people to be able to share those types of stories, pictures, videos. If people are at the game, they can share stories on an activity wall and meet people for tailgating and trade tickets and find, homemade Vikings crafts, something that we've been really working on since 2017, and it's really close to actually being a real thing, which is a little surreal because there were points where I wasn't sure I was going to be able to stick the landing on this, because app development is just so far out of what I'm accustomed to do from an IT perspective, and it's restrictively expensive. And so that'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks as well. So stay tuned to the entire UFTA Sports Network. We got a lot of exciting stuff. The most exciting part of it, though, is that Mr. Tim McNiff is day by day 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps backwards, plugging away to launch some of the first shows that we're going to be doing in our new revamped UFTA TV department. You've been busting your ass, man, and it does really mean a lot to me personally. I know more than anything that tech issues are infuriating. I broke more than I should say, for credibility reasons, on air printers in college, because I always wait till the last minute and then they won't print and then I smash them. It just drives me crazy. So I appreciate your patience in dealing with all this cameras and green screens, but everything. People are gonna love the stuff that I've seen once we're ready to share it with the world, which should be, I guess, in the next couple days.
Soon.
Yeah,
Wow.
soon.
Yeah, soon.
And so we'll be
Fingers
announcing that heavily, and hopefully by the draft we'll be able to all hang out, do video stuff, be on the app, argue about why the pick was good, the pick was bad, so on and so forth. So lots of cool things happening. We couldn't do it without the support of everybody in the city of Detroit Lakes and around the state of Minnesota, or really around the world. It does actually mean a lot to us. We're all having a really great time doing this. It's a dream for all of us to be able to basically cover sports for a living, and you guys make that possible. So thank you for everyone that listens to this show, that shares the podcast, that looks forward to it. It's going to be a great 2021, is my point. But this has been the Vikings Territory Breakdown for St. Patrick's Day, the 17th of March. We will catch you guys next week. Have a fun night. Skol.